everyone, it's Leanne. Welcome to another video on my YouTube channel. So last week I did a Michael's haul and shared that video with you, and this is the result of that haul. This is the card that I created for my dad for his birthday using the items I picked up at Michael's. So to begin, I have an A2 size folded card, and I picked up these Recollections loose leaf papers. These are in the scrapbooking section at Michael's. So I'm going to use these for the card as well. And then I picked up some stamps. So I got Tim Holtz, The Journey. And then the one on the right is Recollections, and it's called Flourishy. And so these two stamp sets are going to help me create that card. I picked up Distress Oxide ink. This is in Vintage Photo. And so I'm ready to create the card. So I'm starting with the base first. So this is that A2 folded card. I'm putting this directly with some roll tape or 2-way tape onto this parchment looking paper that I have. Now you'll notice that I left it in from the edge. I left an overhang, and so the reason I do that is because I can come back here with my ruler and my X-Acto knife and cut that edge precise to the backing of the card. If I pre-cut this, then I would really have to worry about lining it up when I stuck it together and worrying about if maybe one edge would be too short or one would be too long and it wouldn't be even. So I find this is the easiest way to do it. And this is the way they taught us in design school. We weren't allowed to do anything without using an X-Acto knife and a ruler to cut up those edges. And we weren't allowed to use the factory edge of any cut paper. So old habits die hard, I guess, but it does give you the best result to do it that way. So I'm coming in with this deep blue paper as well. I'm going to create an inset piece for that. And so I'm just measuring it with my ruler how wide the A2 card size is and how much I want to bring in this sheet of paper. So I'm just going to kind of roughly guess with my measurements, marking it with my pen here where I think I approximately want that cut. I'm not being very precise, just trying to eyeball the edge of each, the top edge and the left edge, and try to match it up. So I'm cutting this out just so I have something smaller to work with. And then I'm going to come in with my paper cutter and trim it up using the guide that I made, those tick marks with the marker that I drew on earlier. So I'll just trim this up with my guide. I find this is much easier than trying to measure it out exactly. That's a lot of work, and I'm pretty sure I can get it close by just eyeballing it. So I'll trim up both of those edges, and then I'm going to bring this back to my card just to make sure that it is the spacing that I want around the edge. I find that I want to trim a little bit off the height. So I'm going to just bring this back to my paper cutter and easily trim off just a sliver and try to even up those sides. So I find this is just much easier to do than if I were to measure it out and try to do it precisely, because this way I can see it and eyeball it and do quick little cuts to trim it up. So next I'm going to come in with this chocolate brown sparkly paper, and I love this. I think it looks so pretty with that vintage parchment-y looking paper at the back. And I don't want to use a lot of this, but I'm going to use a band of it. So I'm just going to trim off wider than I know that I want, just so I have a smaller paper to work with. And so I'm putting this in the back, and I tried putting it vertical, and then I tried putting it horizontal. It almost reminds me of like a ribbon wrapping a present. And so that's kind of what I'm going for, the look I'm going for. So I like the horizontal layout best. So I'm going to bring this in and trim it up on my paper cutter, making sure that it's wider than the edges of my card so I can trim that up like I did with the parchment paper. But I'm going to use this to trim up the vertical width of it, or I guess it'll be the horizontal width when it's on the card. And so I'm putting that in, and I like the height of it. I think it's going pretty good. What I'm not satisfied with is how much space isn't showing on the edges. I want to see more of that brown peeking through. So I'm just bringing my blue paper back to my cutter and just trimming off a little bit more of that width. And so that should help me have some of that brown poking through better. So now I just found the center of the sides of my card. I'm just using the ruler to make a quick mark. And then when I put the brown band down, I'm going to center it over these tick marks. So again, just eyeballing it. I find this is easiest. I used to get my ruler and set square and T-square and measure it out. And I mean, at the end of the day, you look at everything with your eyes. You don't look at it with a ruler. So as long as it's generally close and I can pretty much guesstimate it, I'm pretty happy with doing it like this. So I have that tacked down in place with my tape roller. And again, I left a little bit of overhang so I can make those edges just perfect. So I'm just going to trim those up and this part will be done. So that's perfect. That's going very good. So now I'm going to come in with the main paper. Now this isn't just a solar white cardstock that I would normally use. This is actually a tan colored paper that I picked up from the loose leaf papers in Michael's in the scrapbooking section. So I'm cutting out a piece that's bigger than what I'll need, just so, again, I have just a smaller piece of paper to work with and it fits in my cutter. So I'm going to bring this in and trim up those rough edges, and then I'm going to use this to do my stamping on. So this will, I think, give a nice effect with the Vintage Photo Distress Oxide ink, and with this cream colored paper it complements the parchment looking paper and that brown paper too. So this is the ink I'm using. I have Distress Oxide in Vintage Photo and Antique Linen. Now the Antique Linen is just a distress ink, it's not the oxide version. I'm going to use that to distress the paper. So using a distress ink to distress the paper, I guess. But I just want to give that kind of antique look and make the edges a little more just rustic and a little more vintage looking. So weathered or worn. So this was super easy and quick to do with my circle blender. And then I'm going to use the Distress Oxide for stamping. Now the difference is that the Distress Oxide is a mix between a transparent and an opaque ink. Whereas the Distress ink, you can layer it and as you layer it, you'll see the colors that you first put down underneath coming out of the top colors. So they're transparent, they show each other through, and the more you layer, the more dark it gets. With the Distress Oxide ink, it has a little more body to it, so it will be a little more opaque and better for stamping an image. So I'm going to use that as my ink pad. So I like how this is looking. I love that vintage look. I'm going to stamp the truck from the Tim Holtz stamps and put it as the center focal point on my card. So this ink is pretty thick and a little bit goopy. It's a heavier ink, but it stamped really nice. I'm just doing a test here because it's my first time stamping. And I thought everything looked great. The only thing is the center was a little weak, so I'm going to make sure I press extra good in the center when I stamp this. So I'm re-inking this up, and then I will stamp it onto my prepared vintage paper. So I'm going to make sure I push that down really good to get a good impression. I don't mind though if there's some gaps in the stamp because it still gives it that kind of vintagey feel, and that's exactly what I'm going for. Now using some of the Flourish stamps from the Recollections Flourish stamp set, I'm going to put a border across the bottom, and I stamped the middle first because the stamp isn't wide enough to do my card, so I do have to sort of wallpaper it together. I thought by starting in the middle, I'll make sure that the pattern will be centered and then stamp each edge after that. I'm going to come in with some corner stamps now to do some more embellishments. So these are sort of, remind me of vintage photo corners, and I'm just going to put those in the upper half of the card. Now I'm coming in with my Copic marker E31 Brick Beige, and I'm going to put a shadow on the truck just to ground it to the scene. It doesn't look like it's a ghost truck and it's floating in space. So just very carefully thinking about where the shadows would be, what kind of shadow footprint the truck would create. I'm starting in the center first because I know that's the safe area where I definitely want to lay down ink. And then as I get to the edges, I'm trying to lighten up my brush stroke and make it sort of wisp off the page so it almost gradiates into that background. So you can see the difference that it makes. Just putting that one shadow, it really sets the image. So I'm coming in with a fine liner now, and this is in a dark kind of woodsy brown color. And I'm handwriting my sentiment. I didn't speed this up. I'm doing this at real speed. You're seeing it at real speed. I find that if I go too slow that my lines get wiggly or they don't have that fluid, smooth sort of curvature to them. So I do try to, I practice this a couple times on a paper, and then I come in and try to do it all at once very perfect. I mean, that's the goal, but, or as close to perfect as I can. So now I'm going to assemble the rest of the card. I'm doing the blue cardstock next, using my tape roller. I love this tool. It's super quick and handy to use. So I'm going to bring that in and attach this layer. I'm not going to use foam tape for anything. This is a card for my dad. I don't want to make it too poppy or jumpy and really keep that vintage feel, but I do like the layers. I like the depth that it gives, and just sort of the break in the visual colors. So using the same tape roller, I'm going to bring in the main part of the image and tack that down. Now I'm coming in with a gold gel pen and just very lightly embellishing some of the flourishes, the flourish stamps. I'm not going to put gold on the truck or any of the focal elements, just the accompanying elements. And so there's my card. This is the finished result. So this was a different card for me, a little bit different of a style. I hope you guys enjoyed looking at this video. If you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe so you're notified as I post more videos. Thank you so much for watching.